Well, looks like OnePlus didn't want to be left out of the Techtober fun, so guess what? Out of the blue, they launched two new phones. Okay, it's not exactly out of the blue. We have been hearing leaks and rumors about these phones for quite a while. But now, the N10 and N100, they're official. So in this video, let's take a look at what these two new phones from OnePlus have to offer. So let's start with the N10 first, because I find it more interesting out of these two phones. So the N10, it's like a budget OnePlus Nord. Now, with a price cut comes some compromises. So what are they? Starting with the display, the panel here is a smidge larger than the one on the OnePlus Nord. 6.49 inches on the N10 compared to 6.44 on the Nord. Full HD Plus, of course. The refresh rate is still 90Hz, so that's amazing. But the bummer here is a step down from AMOLED to IPS LCD tech. On the plus side, it's protected by Corning's Gorilla Glass 3. OnePlus has also decided to ditch the pill-shaped cutout and instead go with a single punch hole. That's where the 16 megapixel selfie snapper lives. So, a downgrade from the 32 plus 8 megapixel setup on the OnePlus Nord. On paper at least. Moving on to the processor, we have a Snapdragon 690 in here. Like the 765G inside the OnePlus Nord, this too is an octa-core chip, but the primary difference lies in the clock speeds. The 765G comes with Kryo 475 cores with a max clock of 2.4 GHz, while the Kryo 560 cores on the Snapdragon 690 can ramp up to a maximum of 2 GHz. So benchmark numbers aside, I would expect both these phones to perform equally well. Yes, it's a 7 series versus a 6 series, but guys, we're talking real world benefits here. So both have 5G support, both phones run on Oxygen OS, which in my opinion is one of the fastest and most well optimized software skins out there. As far as gaming goes, we have an Adreno 619L GPU in here. In comparison, we have the Adreno 620 on the OnePlus Nord. Summing up the performance section, I would expect both these phones to be pretty good. But again, guys, we can't confirm till we get our hands on the device. Now, before we move on to battery life though, let me just take a quick minute to tell that if you have been enjoying this video thus far, then a sub to the channel would be awesome. And oh, click that bell icon to get into our notification squad as well. Capacity wise, the N10 actually has a larger battery at 4300 mAh, and what's more, we retain support for Warp Charge 30D. That being said, we do have an 8nm processor in here rather than a 7nm one, and an IPS screen instead of an AMOLED one. So despite the bigger size, I think battery life might remain the same. And the added battery size also means that we get a slightly thicker phone at 9mm, and it also weighs a bit more at 190 grams. We have dwelled on the shortcomings for quite a bit, so let's change track and look at something that the N10 does better. It has a headphone jack, huge plus in my book, and it gets dual speakers. As for the fingerprint sensor, that's a capacitive unit to the back. We also get storage expansion in here via micro SD card slot, so that's a plus as well. As far as RAM and ROM goes, we have 6 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of UFS 2.1 storage. Which then leads us to the cameras. Like the Nord, we also have quad cameras here. The primary though has changed. This is a 64 megapixel sensor with an f1.8 lens. So on paper, it's an upgrade over the 48 megapixel Nord camera, but we don't have optical image stabilization here. As far as the rest of the three sensors go, we have an 8 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel depth, and 2 megapixel monochrome. So that's the N10. 5G, Snapdragon 690, 90Hz display, quad cameras, and a bigger 4300 mAh battery with support for Warp Charge 30D. But well, what about the N100? Well, common logic dictates that 100 is greater than 10, right? But not this case, since the N100 is actually the budget device here. So let's quickly run down the specs. Design wise, it's the same as the N10. So we have the rectangular camera bump, the rear mounted fingerprint sensor. Up front, the panel is slightly larger at 6.52 inches. Despite that, the resolution and refresh rate has both taken a hit. This is an HD plus IPS LCD panel. Powering those pixels, we have a Snapdragon 460 processor. No 5G capabilities here. And there's an Adreno 610 handling all the GPU duties. As far as cameras go, we have a 13 megapixel main sensor with the usual token 2 megapixel depth and macro sensors. And the front camera is an 8 megapixel snapper. Now, it does beat the N10 when it comes to battery capacity. It sports a 5000 mAh battery, a 16% jump in capacity. Despite that, it actually weighs ever so slightly less than the N10 at 188 grams. Now, as you guys can guess from the rest of the specs, this is a pretty budget device, but OnePlus has still retained the Type-C port here, so that's nice to see. We also get 18-watt fast charging on board. Like the N10, the N100 also comes in one variant, 4GB RAM, 64GB UFS 2.1 storage. So I'm kinda curious to see how well does this device perform. After all, we all know how fast and snappy Oxygen OS is, but can it run on a 4 series chip? Well, that's something that only time can tell, and the same can be said about Indian price and availability. As for the European prices, the OnePlus N10 starts from £329. Converted, that's around 30,000 Indian rupees, and the N100 is £179 or around 17,000 Indian rupees. Of course, the European prices, they're slightly higher than what the Indian prices would be. I mean, come on, they can't price the N10 higher than the OnePlus Nord now, can they? Anyway, so you guys tell me in the comments, what do you think OnePlus should price the N10 and N100 in India at? Also, what do you think of these two new devices from OnePlus? Again, let me know in the comments below. And with that, we come to the end of this video. As always, like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications by hitting that bell icon if you haven't yet. Thanks a lot for watching till the end, guys. Have a good one. Cheers.